Almost every country on Earth is in debt. The United States is in debt. China is in debt. Canada, India, the UK, France, every modern nation, from the largest global superpower to the smallest developing island state, carries massive national debt. And not just a little. Debt in the trillions. Debt so large that the numbers barely mean anything anymore. But the question no one seems to ask is the most obvious one. If everyone owes money, then who is the lender? Who actually holds the other side of that debt? Because debt only works if someone collects. There has to be a creditor. There has to be someone or something being paid. So who is it? When you try to answer that question, you start pulling on a thread that leads into the very heart of how modern economies work. It leads to the real architecture behind governments, banks, and global power. And once you see it, you do not go back to viewing money the same way. Most people think of national debt like personal debt. If you borrow money, you owe it to a bank. If a country borrows money, they must owe another country. And yes, that does happen. But that's only the surface layer. The more you dig, the stranger things become. Because the real structure of modern money reveals something counterintuitive. Our entire global financial system is designed to run on perpetual debt. Debt that never gets paid off. Debt that grows forever. Debt that must grow forever. If the debt stops, the economy collapses. That's where we're starting. But to understand how the world got here, we need to go back to before money meant what it means today. For most of human history, wealth wasn't numbers on screens. It was tangible. Wheat, livestock, land, iron, gold, silver. You could see wealth. You could touch wealth. Your wealth didn't depend on someone's promise, it simply existed. But as societies grew, trade became more complex. The problem wasn't wealth, it was moving it. Transporting gold coins or heavy goods for every transaction was slow, dangerous, and inefficient. So instead of moving the wealth itself, civilizations began recording promises, a debt ledger, a written record of who owed who. Credit is older than coins. It's older than minted money. It has existed since clay tablets in ancient Sumer. Those records worked because the community trusted them. But trust has always been fragile, and whoever controls the ledger controls the power. That realization changed the world. The moment societies understood that controlling records of wealth could be more powerful than controlling wealth itself, the seeds of banking were planted. Fast forward to medieval Europe. Merchant families in Venice, Genoa, Florence developed more complex credit systems. They are not kings, they are not armies, yet they can influence kings and armies. Because armies need money. Kingdoms need loans. Wars, especially, are expensive. Steel and horses and soldiers and provisions all cost resources, and war has always been the single greatest driver of debt in history. Debt and power merge. This is where central banking emerges not as a service to the public, but as a financial solution to governments in crisis. Take the founding of the Bank of England in 1694. Why was it created? England was broke. They needed money to fund a war. Private financiers, the wealthy banking families, offered to lend to the government. In return, they were granted the legal right to create and issue the national currency. The government no longer controlled money. The creators of money would be private entities who would then lend it back to the government with interest. The king needed money to rule, but the people lending him the money now ruled him. That system spreads. France establishes a central bank. Germany, the United States eventually creates the Federal Reserve in 1913. Almost every modern country now has a central bank, and almost every central bank issues money as debt. When governments need money, they borrow it. They issue government bonds, IOUs. Banks, investors, corporations, other nations buy these bonds. And the government must pay interest on them. So a nation's debt is not just a financial number, it is a leash, a mechanism of dependence. The more a nation borrows, the more leverage its creditors have. But here is the twist. The largest holder of most national debt is not foreign countries. It is the nation's own central bank. meaning the government owes debt to the entity that creates its money. So the government borrows money that the central bank prints and then owes that money back with interest, which raises a question that breaks most people's understanding of money. How can a country owe debt to itself? The answer is that the government and the central bank are not the same thing. The government spends money. The central bank issues it, controls it, and lends it. They operate alongside each other, but they are not one institution. And the central bank is not controlled by voters. It is technically independent. It does not answer to the public the way elected officials do. So money is not created by governments. Money is created by banks. And banks create money when they issue debt. Every dollar, every yen, every euro, every pound is brought into existence because someone owes it. If all debt disappeared, the global money supply would collapse. This is the part that feels like a glitch in the system, but it's not a glitch. The system was designed this way. Now jump ahead to the mid-20th century. World War II ends. Nations need rebuilding. Economies are destroyed. The world needs a new financial order. So world leaders meet at Bretton Woods in 1944 to create one global monetary framework. They design a system where currencies are linked to the US dollar, and the US dollar is linked to gold. This gives the United States immense global power. If you want to trade internationally, you need US dollars. And if you need US dollars, you need access to US controlled financial channels. But in 1971, President Nixon ends the gold standard. The US dollar is no longer backed by gold. It is backed by trust, which means governments can now create money by issuing debt without being tied to any physical limit. This changes everything. Once money is no longer backed by something finite, the amount of money that can be created becomes theoretically infinite. And because money is created through debt, debt also becomes infinite. From that moment forward, the economy becomes dependent on the continuous expansion of debt. If debt growth slows, the economy slows. If the economy slows, politicians panic, markets panic, the public panics. So governments and central banks intervene, lower interest rates, inject liquidity, create money, stimulate credit. This works for years. It works for decades, but only by pushing the problem further forward. Every boom becomes fueled by more borrowing. Every crisis becomes more severe. 2008 is the first alarm. The global financial system cracks under the weight of too much debt. Banks fail, markets crash. And what is the solution? The central banks inject more money, lower interest rates to near zero, and create even more debt to rescue the system already collapsing under debt. The solution to the crisis becomes the cause of the next one. Then comes 2020. A global pandemic shuts down the economy. Governments panic. Central banks print more money in 2 years than they printed in the previous 50. Debt skyrockets. Inflation surges. Prices rise. Wages do not keep up. The cost of living becomes unbearable. Housing becomes unattainable. The middle class begins to feel squeezed into extinction. Young people start to realize that no matter how hard they work, they are not catching up because they are not competing against effort. They are competing against the value of their currency being diluted. This is not mismanagement. This is not incompetence. This is simply how the system works. Debt is not meant to be paid back. Debt is meant to be sustained, which leads us back to the original question. If every country owes debt, who is the lender? The answer is layered. Countries owe money to other countries. Countries owe money to private banks. Countries owe money to investment funds and pension funds and corporations. But the largest creditor, the most significant lender, is the central banking system itself. But even this is not the end of the trail, because central banks also work in a network. They coordinate. They influence each other's policies. Their decisions move markets, shape inflation, trigger recessions, and determine the economic stability of nations. So who are they accountable to? Not voters, not citizens. They are accountable to each other And at the top of the structure lie institutions like the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS, an organization most people have never heard of, but one that coordinates global central banking policy. They meet behind closed doors. They do not campaign. They are not elected. They do not pass laws. But their decisions move trillions of dollars and can determine the fate of entire countries. If a nation cannot pay its debt, it does not simply go bankrupt. It becomes dependent. It must accept conditions: austerity, structural reform, privatization of public assets, cuts to public programs. In extreme cases, it becomes economically subordinate. Debt becomes control. This system has winners and losers. The winners are those closest to the creation of money, the financiers, the asset holders, the institutions who receive newly created capital before its effects ripple through the economy. The losers are wage earners, savers, and ordinary citizens who must live with rising prices.